So we start transition with our Year 9 students and we use the Work Inspirations program. Briefly, that's a 4-day program where students get to experience career conversations in the workplace. So that is followed up in Year 10 with work experience, where we're able to identify the interests of students and place them according to their needs. Following that, our Year 10 set plan interviews are held, and during that time, that's where we start to identify pathways, whether the student might be looking at TAFE at school in Year 11 and 12, or even a school-based traineeship. In non-COVID times, we actually have hosted DES information evenings for our disability employment services who are local or within the Brisbane metro area. We invite those groups to come into the school where parents can actually meet the representatives, hear what each organisation has to offer, and then make their own decision as to which is the best service for their young person. At the same time, we will offer an NDIS information evening as well. And that's where our students who might be QCIA bound, where they might need a SLES funding for after school. That's where those families are able to receive more information. So by the end of Year 12, we have had our students complete a post-school checklist where they have identified all the things that they need to go out beyond Year 12. And we have exit meetings with our parents and we work through that checklist, just ensuring all young people do have a pathway for after school.
Well, here at school, like every teacher that works, we work really hard to get into that partnership with students to make sure that they have that successful outcome for their senior school. I'll give you an example of one student that had a heavily modified program throughout Year 7. He started with us in Year 7. Teacher aids to help him access the curriculum, adjusted work to help him access to the curriculum. In Year 10, we all made that decision, so parents included and the school, to put this student on a QCIA. And that is probably one of the most successful decisions that all the stakeholders made for this particular student. What the hope is that he will work towards an independent transition towards his successful outcome for his senior schooling. He's doing his QCIA or completing his QCIA alongside a traineeship, which is a supported traineeship for 2 days a week. And I think with these ideas in mind, that it's really clear to all involved that there are many ways to achieve that successful outcome for senior students.
I have a student who's graduating this year. Obviously he's Year 12. He will graduate, I think he's accumulated 36 credits, and of those 2 are Cert 3s and he has 3 Cert 2s. One of the Cert 3s is attached to a traineeship. It's Cert 3 in hospitality. So he has a very clear direction what he's going to do when the school gates clang shut for the final time. He also has about $7,000 in the bank, he tells me, so that he can buy himself a car now that he has his P's. So he's delighted. His family are also delighted, but they never thought he could be this successful in high school, since he had a few barriers in his way, as all students with a disability do. So how did we get here? Well, we begin the transition process with a meeting in Year 10 with the students and their families. We have substantial, productive discussions at the initial meeting, where we pretty much start off with a blank canvas and allow the student to lead the way. We also access at that meeting regional services so that we can map out a meaningful transition pathway for that student and their family. We also introduce the disability employment services at this point so that the students have some time to consider if that fits into their pathway, and most of them do. Accessing the DES services has been a vital part of the transition pathway for many of our students and their families, and the families have actually told us how wonderful it's been, because they've seen their students grow in confidence and engage more socially both within the workplace environment and outside of that. We've seen that change as well at school. So it's just wonderful. The support the students receive from the DES is often crucial to their success in the workforce because it helps to build their employability skills and their confidence, obviously. Then early in year 11, we meet again. The student decided that he did want a traineeship and he'd like it in hospitality. So we immediately had put the DESs out to see what they can track down, and they came back with that. There have been a few hiccups along the way, I won't tell a lie, but we have always been able to overcome them because of the productive relationship between the school, the students and the DES. The student himself is very happy with his senior phase of learning and feels prepared to transition from school to the workplace. He has learned the biggest lesson, I think, that he can make a future for himself that he can be proud of, and that any barrier can either be overcome or got around. We are all very proud of him, and he is very proud of himself.
During the transition process for students with disability, there can be many barriers to transitions, and they can occur at any stage during that transition process. For educators, it's important to think about how they can support their learners to overcome those barriers to accessing that transition. One great way to do this is through the Universal Design for Learning framework developed by Harvard University. So during the transition process, as I said, students with disability can have barriers to accessing that transition process at any stage. As such, educators look for ways to support them to overcome those barriers. This is because not one approach works for any student. As the saying goes for students on the spectrum, all students on the autism spectrum are different. This goes to any student. For this reason, there's not one approach that can be used to support students to overcome those barriers to the transition process. For this reason, educators need a toolbox or a shed of tools that they can access to support those students to overcome their barriers. They need to know the characteristics of their students, their strengths, their challenges, and their functional impact. The Universal Design for Learning framework that comes out of Harvard University consists of 3 principles. The first principle, highlighted in this green column, is the idea that you can engage learners in the learning process or transitions in multiple ways. The second column, the purple column, principle 2, relates to the idea that when you're teaching knowledge and skills to your students during the transition process, you can do it in multiple ways. So it's what teachers do. So principle 1 and principle 2 are what teachers and educators do. The third principle, the blue column, relates to the idea that during the transition process, learners and students can demonstrate their knowledge and understanding and skills in multiple ways. There's not one way that they can demonstrate what they know and understand. These 3 principles are then divided into guidelines, which are these bigger ideas. So providing options for creating interest, providing options for perception, and providing options for physical education, physical action. And there are 6 more of those guidelines. Those guidelines are then divided into checkpoints or strategies, ways to support learners to overcome their barriers to the transition process. These guidelines and checkpoints are divided into 3 levels. This first level, these guidelines and checkpoints are designed to support educators to support learners to access the transition process and overcome their barriers to the transition process. This is done by recruiting their interest in transitions, supporting students to perceive the information and skills they need to understand, and providing learners with physical ways to demonstrate what they need to during that transition process. The second layer of guidelines and checkpoints or guidelines and strategies are designed to build on those skills for overcoming those barriers to the transition process. This is about supporting learners to sustain their effort and persistence when they hit barriers during the transition process. Once learners perceive information, the language and symbols used during that transition are important to continue to build on their skills, and it provides ways for learners to express and communicate their knowledge and skills. The final layer of guidelines and checkpoints or strategies, if you want to call it strategies, are designed to help learners internalize those skills for overcoming their barriers to the transition process. So once learners have overcome their barriers to the learning process and built on those skills, these guidelines and checkpoints are designed to help learners internalize those skills. So if they come across another barrier, they can overcome it easily by themselves. To do this, the 3 principles focus on supporting learners to develop skills and strategies for self-regulation, promote the expectations they can achieve. The second principle in the internalize area relates to supporting learners to comprehend what they've learned in terms of the information, and supporting learners to develop executive functioning skills, because those skills will help them build on those strategies for overcoming barriers to the transition process if they hit them anytime during the transition process. So it's fundamental for educators supporting students with disability during transitions to know their learners really well, to identify their characteristics, strengths, challenges, and functional impact. Once they've identified those, they can go to the Universal Design for Learning framework and identify ways to support their learners to overcome their barriers to the learning process, build on those skills, and internalize those skills. So during the transition process, if they hit another hurdle or another barrier, they can overcome them themselves. Because it's really important for educators to think about, whenever they do something, is what am I doing developing independence in my learners?